At 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Commander Sarah Mitchell thought her most dangerous days were behind her. After serving 3 tours in Afghanistan as a Navy SEAL pilot, she was finally heading home for a well-deserved vacation. The commercial flight seemed peaceful, filled with families and business travelers. But in the span of 60 seconds, her quiet retirement celebration would turn into the fight of her life. When 3 armed men stormed the cockpit screaming, "Sit down or die," they expected terrified passengers to cower in fear. What they didn't expect was a decorated war veteran who had survived Taliban ambushes, executed covert rescue missions behind enemy lines, and earned the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. They had just picked the wrong flight and the wrong woman to terrorize. This is the true story of how one woman's military training, quick thinking, and unbreakable spirit turned a hijacking into a lesson that would echo through aviation security forever. A story that proves sometimes the most ordinary moment can become extraordinary when courage meets opportunity. Commander Sarah Mitchell pressed her face against the small aircraft window, watching the clouds drift by like white cotton balls scattered across an endless blue canvas. After 15 years of military service, she still found peace in the sky, though today she was a passenger rather than the pilot. The Boeing 747 hummed steadily as it cut through the atmosphere, carrying 312 souls from London to New York City. Sarah adjusted her civilian clothes, still feeling strange without her military uniform. The simple jeans and navy sweater felt foreign after years of tactical gear and flight suits. At 38, she had earned the right to dress down, having just completed her final mission as a Navy SEAL pilot 3 weeks earlier. The Navy Cross medal, sitting in her carry-on bag, represented countless hours of training, sacrifice, and service to her country. She closed her eyes and remembered the ceremony where Admiral Harrison had pinned the medal to her chest. For extraordinary heroism during combat operations in Afghanistan, he had read aloud. Commander Mitchell repeatedly flew into hostile territory under enemy fire to extract wounded soldiers, saving 47 lives during her 3 tours of duty. The memory brought a small smile to her face. Those men and women were alive because she had refused to leave them behind. The flight attendant, a kind woman named Patricia with silver hair and warm eyes, approached her row. "Can I get you anything, miss? We have complimentary drinks available." "Just water, please," Sarah replied politely. She had trained herself to stay alert and hydrated during long flights, a habit that had served her well during military transport missions. As Patricia handed her the plastic cup, Sarah noticed the woman's hands trembling slightly. "Are you feeling all right?" Sarah asked with genuine concern. Patricia glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "It's probably nothing, but I've noticed some passengers acting strangely. 3 men in first class have been whispering together since takeoff. They keep looking toward the cockpit and checking their watches." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Years of combat experience had taught her to trust her instincts and the instincts of others. What kind of strange behavior? They boarded separately but clearly know each other. One of them asked very specific questions about flight procedures during boarding. Another kept asking about the cockpit door and security measures. Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I've been flying for 23 years, and something feels off." Sarah's mind began processing the information like a computer analyzing data. 3 coordinated individuals, unusual interest in security procedures, nervous behavior from experienced crew members. The pattern was familiar from her counterterrorism training. "Have you reported this to the captain?" "I was going to, but I didn't want to cause a panic if I'm just being paranoid." Patricia looked embarrassed. Maybe I'm watching too many news programs. Trust your instincts, Sarah said firmly. In my experience, when something feels wrong, it usually is. She didn't mention her military background, but her tone carried authority that made Patricia stand straighter. I'll speak with Captain Rodriguez right away, Patricia decided, her confidence returning. As the flight attendant moved toward the cockpit, Sarah's senses heightened. She began subtly observing the cabin, using skills honed through years of reconnaissance missions. Her eyes swept the passenger compartment methodically, noting exits, potential weapons, and passenger positions. The routine came naturally, like breathing. In first class, she spotted the three men Patricia had mentioned. They were dressed in business suits, but something about their posture suggested they were more comfortable in different clothing. One man kept adjusting his jacket in a way that suggested he was concealing something underneath. Another had calloused hands that spoke of physical training rather than office work. The third man's eyes constantly scanned the cabin with the systematic attention of someone conducting surveillance. Sarah's military training had taught her to read people like books. These men moved with purpose and coordination that suggested extensive planning. Their body language spoke of nervous energy barely contained, like coiled springs ready to release. Most telling was their complete lack of interest in the in-flight entertainment, books, or normal passenger activities. Instead, they focused entirely on studying the aircraft layout and crew movements. The woman sitting next to Sarah, a grandmother traveling to visit her grandchildren, chatted cheerfully about her family. Sarah responded politely while maintaining her observation of the suspicious passengers. Her years as a pilot had taught her to multitask effectively, managing multiple priorities simultaneously without losing focus on any single element. "Are you traveling for business or pleasure, dear?" the grandmother asked. "Vacation," Sarah replied simply. "I just finished a long work assignment and need some time to decompress." It was technically true, though her work assignment had involved flying combat missions in one of the world's most dangerous regions. Through the cabin window, Sarah could see they were approximately 2 hours into the 6-hour flight. The aircraft was cruising at optimal altitude, and most passengers had settled into the rhythm of long-distance travel. Children were napping, business travelers were working on laptops, and families were sharing snacks. It was the kind of peaceful scene that made excellent cover for anyone planning something sinister. Patricia returned from the cockpit, looking more concerned than before. She made eye contact with Sarah and gave a subtle nod that suggested her warnings had been taken seriously. Captain Rodriguez was likely implementing additional security measures discreetly, following protocols designed to handle potential threats without alarming passengers. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, not from fear, but from the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied dangerous situations. During her Navy SEAL training, instructors had taught her that controlled fear was an asset, sharpening focus and reflexes when survival depended on split-second decisions. She had learned to channel that energy into heightened awareness and improved performance. The three suspicious men were becoming more agitated as time passed. One kept checking his phone despite being at cruising altitude where cellular service was unavailable. Another had started sweating despite the comfortable cabin temperature. The third man had begun making subtle hand signals to his companions, suggesting they were communicating through predetermined gestures. Sarah reached in her carry-on bag and felt for her Navy Cross medal, not for luck, but for a reminder of who she was and what she was capable of. The medal felt cool and solid under her fingertips, representing years of training that had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. She had faced Taliban fighters, survived aircraft emergencies, and led rescue missions under intense enemy fire. Whatever these men were planning, she would be ready. The captain's voice came over the intercom with a routine announcement about weather conditions and expected arrival time. To most passengers, it sounded like standard information, but Sarah caught subtle changes in his tone that suggested heightened alertness. Captain Rodriguez was likely a former military pilot himself, given his calm professionalism under potential threat conditions. As Sarah continued her discreet surveillance, she began formulating contingency plans. The aircraft layout provided several tactical advantages for someone with her training. The narrow aisles would limit the attackers' mobility and force them to approach in single file. Emergency equipment locations were clearly marked, providing potential improvised weapons. Most importantly, her position in the middle of the aircraft gave her multiple response options depending on how events developed. The grandmother beside her had fallen asleep, her head resting against the window. Other passengers were similarly relaxed, trusting in the safety of commercial aviation and, unaware of the potential danger brewing, just rose away. Sarah envied their innocence while accepting the responsibility that came with her unique skills and awareness. One of the suspicious men stood up and began walking toward the rear of the aircraft. His movement was casual but purposeful, and Sarah noticed he paused to look into the galley area where flight attendants stored emergency equipment. He was conducting reconnaissance, gathering final intelligence before implementing whatever plan they had developed. Sarah's training told her that the situation was escalating. The men were moving from planning phase to execution phase, following patterns she had studied extensively during counterterrorism courses. Their behavior suggested they would act soon, likely before the aircraft reached the point where air traffic control would expect regular check-ins from the cockpit. She closed her eyes briefly and ran through mental exercises designed to prepare her mind and body for combat. Breathing techniques slowed her heart rate, while visualization exercises helped her rehearse potential scenarios and responses. These were skills that had kept her alive during 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan, and she would need every advantage they provided. The man returned to first class and resumed his seat, but not before making brief eye contact with Sarah. For just a moment, their gazes locked, and she saw something that chilled her blood. His eyes held the flat, emotionless stare of someone prepared to kill without hesitation. This was not going to be a simple hijacking for money or political statements. These men were prepared for violence, and they would not hesitate to use it against anyone who opposed them. Sarah Mitchell had faced death many times during her military career, but always while armed and surrounded by fellow warriors. Today, she was alone among innocent civilians, responsible not just for her own survival, but for the safety of everyone around her. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a familiar burden. She had never failed to bring her people home safely, and she did not intend to start now. The aircraft continued its steady progress across the Atlantic, carrying its passengers toward what should have been a routine arrival in New York City. But Sarah knew that the next few hours would test everything she had learned about courage, leadership, and sacrifice. The calm before the storm was ending, and the real battle was about to begin. The attack came at 2:47 p.m., exactly when Sarah's tactical instincts had predicted it would. The 3 men moved simultaneously with military precision that confirmed her worst fears about their training and intentions. The first man produced a ceramic knife that had somehow passed through security screening, while his companions revealed similar weapons concealed in their clothing. "Everyone sit down and shut up," The lead attacker screamed as he lunged toward the cockpit. His voice carried the harsh accent of Eastern Europe, and his movements showed the fluid efficiency of someone trained in close-quarters combat. This aircraft is now under our control. Panic erupted throughout the cabin like a wildfire spreading through dry grass. Passengers screamed and dove for cover while flight attendants frozen in terror. Children began crying as their parents pulled them close, try to shield them from the unfolding nightmare. The peaceful atmosphere of commercial travel evaporated in seconds, replaced by the raw fear that comes with sudden violence. Sarah remained perfectly still, her mind shifting into combat mode with the smooth efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Years of Navy SEAL training had taught her that the first moments of any engagement determined the outcome of the entire battle. While chaos erupted around her, she focused on gathering intelligence and assessing the tactical situation with clinical precision. The lead attacker was approximately 6 feet tall, muscular build, moving with the confidence of someone who had done this before. His two companions flanked the cabin aisles, positioning themselves to control passenger movement and prevent interference with their leader's advance toward the cockpit. Their coordination suggested extensive rehearsal and professional military or terrorist training. I said, "Sit down or die." The leader screamed again when several passengers remained standing in shock. To emphasize his point, he grabbed a businessman who had been trying to move toward the emergency exit and pressed the ceramic blade against his throat. "The next person who moves will watch this man die." The cabin fell into terrified silence, broken only by muffled sobbing and the steady hum of the aircraft engines. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, but it remained steady and controlled. This was the moment her training had prepared her for, when split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death for everyone around her. Patricia, the flight attendant who had first noticed the suspicious behavior, stood near the galley with tears streaming down her face. The attackers had not yet noticed her, focused as they were on controlling the main passenger area and reaching the cockpit. Sarah caught Patricia's eye and gave her a subtle hand signal that meant stay calm and be ready. The lead attacker reached the cockpit door and began pounding on the reinforced barrier that had been installed after September 11th. "Open this door now, or I start killing passengers," he shouted. His voice carried genuine rage, suggesting this was not just a performance, but deeply personal motivation driving his actions. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional despite the circumstances. "This is your captain speaking. We are currently experiencing a security situation. Please remain in your seats and follow all crew member instructions. We are in contact with air traffic control and appropriate authorities." The message was clearly intended to buy time and maintain some semblance of order, but it enraged the lead attacker further. He turned away from the cockpit door and scanned the cabin with wild eyes, looking for a victim to demonstrate his seriousness. His gaze fell on a young mother holding a crying infant, and Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized his intentions. "Ew," he screamed, pointing the knife at the terrified woman. "Bring me that baby. Maybe the pilots will cooperate when they hear it screaming." This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for, the point where she could no longer remain passive while innocent lives were threatened. Every instinct screamed at her to act, but her training demanded patience until she could strike with maximum effectiveness. She needed to wait for the perfect opportunity when her intervention would save lives rather than escalate the danger. The young mother clutched her baby tighter and shook her head frantically. "Please, no. Please don't hurt my baby." Her voice broke with desperate fear that cut through Sarah like a knife. It reminded her of the Afghan mothers she had helped evacuate from combat zones, women whose only crime was loving their children in a world gone mad with violence. Sarah began moving before she consciously decided to act, her body responding to years of training that had been drilled into her muscle memory. She stood slowly and deliberately, drawing the attention of the nearest attacker while calculating distances and angles like a chess player thinking 3 moves ahead. "Leave her alone," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to command. "Take me instead." The lead attacker spun around to face her, his eyes narrowing as he tried to assess this unexpected challenge to his control. "Sit down, lady, before I cut your throat." "I don't think so," Sarah replied, taking a small step forward. Her tone remained conversational, almost casual, which had the effect of confusing the attackers who expected fear and submission. "You want a hostage to pressure the pilots? Take someone who matters. I'm a Navy officer." The lie was necessary misdirection designed to make her appear valuable while concealing her true capabilities. She needed the attackers focused on her rather than innocent civilians, and she needed them close enough for her specialized training to be effective. The narrow aircraft aisles would work to her advantage once she engaged them in hand-to-hand combat. "Navy officer?" The leader laughed harshly. "What are you going to do? Sail away?" But his eyes showed increased interest. A military hostage would indeed be more valuable than a civilian for pressuring the crew to cooperate. Sarah took another step forward, her movements smooth and unthreatening despite the deadly intentions behind them. She could see the ceramic knife in the leader's hand, noting its length and sharpness while calculating the precise movements needed to disarm him. Her years of close-quarters combat training had included extensive practice against knife-wielding opponents. The second attacker, positioned in the middle of the cabin, started moving towards Sarah to support his leader. This was exactly what she had hoped for, drawing them both into close proximity where their superior numbers would be negated by the confined space. The third attacker remained near the rear of the aircraft, apparently following predetermined orders to maintain position. "You think you're brave?" the leader snarled, raising his knife threateningly. "I killed 3 NATO soldiers in Bosnia. What makes you think one American woman will be any different?" "Maybe nothing," Sarah replied with a slight shrug. "But I guess we're about to find out." The casual response clearly unsettled the attacker, who had expected pleading or threats rather than calm acceptance of the challenge. Sarah could see uncertainty creeping into his expression as he tried to understand why this passenger was showing no fear despite facing a lethal weapon. His confusion was exactly what she needed to gain the initiative. Behind the leader, Patricia was slowly reaching for the emergency equipment cabinet, following Sarah's earlier signal to be ready for action. The flight attendant's hands were still shaking, but she was fighting through her terror to help. Sarah made a mental note to keep Patricia's position in mind during the coming engagement. The young mother with the baby had moved away from the immediate area, creating more room for Sarah to maneuver. Other passengers were pressed against their seats, trying to make themselves invisible while this deadly drama played out just feet away. Sarah could feel their terror and desperation, adding weight to her responsibility to end this situation quickly and decisively. "Last warning," the leader growled, taking a step closer. "Sit down now, or I will gut you like a fish." Sarah smiled slightly, the expression cold and predatory rather than friendly. It was the same look she had worn when facing Taliban fighters who had threatened her crew during extraction missions. "You know what? I don't think you're as tough as you pretend to be." The insult hit its target perfectly, triggering the kind of angry response that would make the attacker careless and predictable. Years of psychological warfare training had taught Sarah that violence-prone individuals often had fragile egos that could be manipulated through calculated provocations. The leader's face flushed with rage as he lunged forward with his knife raised high. Sarah moved like lightning, her body responding with the fluid precision of countless hours of combat training. She stepped inside the knife's arc while simultaneously grabbing the attacker's wrist and driving her knee into his solar plexus with devastating force. The ceramic blade flew from his suddenly nerveless fingers as all the air exploded from his lungs. The second attacker rushed forward to help his leader, but Sarah was already moving to engage him. She used the first man's falling body as a shield while positioning herself for the next phase of combat. Her mind remained perfectly clear and focused despite the chaos around her, processing multiple threats and opportunities with computer-like efficiency. The passengers watched in stunned amazement as this unassuming woman transformed into a deadly warrior before their eyes. The grandmother who had been sitting next to Sarah whispered a prayer of gratitude, finally understanding that their salvation had been sitting right beside her all along. But the battle was far from over, and the most dangerous moments still lay ahead. The second attacker came at Sarah with the desperate fury of someone who realized their carefully planned operation was falling apart. His ceramic knife slashed through the air in a vicious arc aimed at her neck. But Sarah was no longer where he expected her to be. Years of combat experience had taught her that movement was life, and standing still in a fight was a guaranteed way to die. Sarah ducked under the knife blade and drove her elbow into the man's kidney with surgical precision. The blow landed exactly where her anatomy training had taught her it would cause maximum damage and disorientation. The attacker gasped and stumbled sideways, his knife hand dropping as pain shot through his nervous system like an electric shock. Before he could recover, Sarah grabbed his knife hand and twisted it behind his back with a joint lock that forced him to drop the weapon or have his wrist broken. The ceramic blade clattered to the floor and slid under one of the passenger's seats, removing another threat from the equation. 2 down, 1 to go, she thought with grim satisfaction. The third attacker, who had been stationed near the rear of the aircraft, was now running forward through the cabin with his own weapon ready. But his position at the back of the plane had given Sarah precious seconds to deal with his companions, and now she could focus her full attention on him. Her breathing remained controlled and steady despite the intense physical exertion of hand-to-hand combat. Passengers scrambled to get out of the way as the final attacker charged down the narrow aisle. An elderly man tried to trip him, but missed, nearly falling from his seat in the attempt. Sarah appreciated the passenger's courage even as she prepared to face the last threat herself. These people deserved to go home safely to their families, and she would not let them down. "Stay back," Sarah called to the passengers. "Everyone get down and stay down." Her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone trained to command in crisis situations. Passengers immediately obeyed, pressing themselves into their seats and shielding their children with their bodies. Even in the midst of terror, they recognized leadership when they heard it, and they trusted this woman who had appeared from nowhere to defend them. The third attacker was younger than his companions, perhaps 25 years old, but his eyes held the same cold determination that marked him as a trained killer. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years preparing for violence, and Sarah could see that he would not be as easy to defeat as the others had been. "You killed my brothers," he screamed as he approached, his accent thick with emotion and rage. "I will make you pay for this." Sarah said nothing, saving her energy for the fight ahead. Trash talk was a waste of breath when facing a truly dangerous opponent, and this young man's skill level was clearly superior to his companions. She could see in his balanced stance, his controlled breathing, and the way he held his weapon with practiced familiarity. As he closed the distance between them, Sarah grabbed a life jacket from the overhead emergency equipment compartment. The thick padding would serve as an improvised shield against his knife attacks, while giving her a weapon to use for both offense and defense. Her military training had emphasized using any available materials as tactical advantages. The young attacker slashed at her with lightning speed, but Sarah caught the blade in the life jacket's padding and twisted hard to the left. The knife became tangled in the fabric, and she used the moment of confusion to drive her knee into his midsection. He doubled over, but managed to keep hold of his weapon, showing the kind of resilience that came from serious combat training. Patricia, the flight attendant who had first alerted Sarah to the danger, appeared behind the attacker with a fire extinguisher raised above her head. Her face was pale with terror, but her determination to help was unmistakable. Sarah caught her eye and shook her head slightly, warning her to stay back. This fight required precision and timing that could be disrupted by well-meaning but untrained assistance. The attacker recovered quickly and came at Sarah again, this time with a series of rapid strikes designed to overwhelm her defenses. His knife work showed formal training in military or terrorist combat techniques, and Sarah realized she was facing someone with skills comparable to her own. The confined space of the aircraft aisle worked both for and against each of them, limiting mobility while increasing the intensity of their engagement. Sarah blocked one strike with a life jacket and countered with a palm strike to his nose that sent blood streaming down his face. The blow staggered him, but also enraged him further, and he responded with a savage overhead attack that would have been lethal if it had connected. Sarah twisted away at the last second, feeling the knife blade pass so close to her face that it disturbed the air around her cheek. The passengers watched this deadly dance with horrified fascination. Many had never witnessed real violence outside of movies and television, and the brutal reality of hand-to-hand combat was both terrifying and mesmerizing. They could see that their unlikely protector was skilled beyond anything they had imagined, but they could also see that she was fighting for her life against a formidable opponent. Sarah feinted left and then moved right, causing the attacker to overcommit to his strike and lose his balance momentarily. She seized the opportunity to grab his knife arm and execute a perfect hip throw that sent him crashing into the armrest of a passenger seat. The impact drove the air from his lungs and caused him to lose his grip on the ceramic weapon. But even disarmed, the young man remained dangerous. He rolled away from Sarah's follow-up attack and came to his feet with his hands raised in a fighting stance that revealed extensive martial arts training. His eyes held the flat stare of someone prepared to fight to the death, and Sarah realized this engagement was far from over. "You cannot stop us all," he panted, blood still flowing from his broken nose. "There are others, many others. This is just the beginning." Sarah heard the words, but did not let them distract her from the immediate threat. Intelligence gathering could wait until after she had neutralized this final attacker and secured the safety of the passengers. Right now, her focus had to remain on the deadly opponent still standing between her and victory. The young man lunged forward with his bare hands, trying to grab Sarah in a chokehold that would allow him to use his superior size and strength against her. But Sarah had trained extensively in grappling techniques designed to counter exactly this type of attack. She dropped low and swept his legs, sending him crashing to the floor of the narrow aisle. Before he could recover, Sarah applied a rear naked choke that cut off blood flow to his brain. The technique was designed to render an opponent unconscious without causing permanent damage, though it required precise application and timing. Too little pressure, and he would escape. Too much, and she could kill him accidentally. The attacker thrashed desperately, trying to break free from the chokehold that was gradually robbing his brain of oxygen. His struggles grew weaker as consciousness began to slip away, and after 30 seconds of perfectly applied pressure, his body went limp in Sarah's arms. She held the position for a few more seconds to ensure he was truly unconscious before releasing him. Silence fell over the cabin as passengers stared at the 3 unconscious attackers scattered throughout the aisle. Sarah stood slowly, breathing hard but not exhausted, her training having prepared her for much longer engagements than this brief but intense battle. She checked each attacker to ensure they were properly restrained and no longer posed a threat. "Is anyone hurt?" she called out to the passengers, her voice steady despite what she had just endured. A chorus of voices assured her that the passengers were shaken but uninjured. The young mother with the baby was crying tears of relief and gratitude, while the elderly businessman who had tried to trip the final attacker was shaking hands that still showed the courage he had displayed. These people had faced terror with remarkable grace, and Sarah felt proud to have defended them. Patricia appeared beside her, with plastic restraints taken from the emergency equipment storage. "I thought you might need these," she said, her voice still trembling, but her actions steady and helpful. "Perfect," Sarah replied, accepting the restraints. "Help me secure them so they can't cause any more trouble when they wake up." As they worked together to bind the unconscious attackers, Sarah's mind was already moving to the next phase of the crisis. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the young man's words about others suggested this hijacking might be part of a larger coordinated attack. She needed to get to the cockpit and coordinate with air traffic control to determine if other aircraft were facing similar threats. The passengers began to realize that their nightmare was over, at least for the moment. Children stopped crying, adults embraced each other with relief, and a spontaneous round of applause broke out as people recognized the extraordinary heroism they had just witnessed. Sarah acknowledged their gratitude with a modest nod, but her mind remained focused on potential ongoing threats. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, filled with relief and professional admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. The security situation has been resolved thanks to the extraordinary actions of one of our passengers. We are diverting to the nearest airport for an emergency landing, where law enforcement will be waiting to take custody of the perpetrators." Sarah looked around the cabin at the faces of the people she had protected, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came from a successful mission. But she also felt the weight of responsibility that came with her unique skills and training. Today had proven that her war was not over just because she had left the military. Evil existed everywhere, and sometimes ordinary citizens needed someone willing to stand between them and the darkness. The aircraft began its descent toward an emergency landing, carrying passengers who would never forget the day a quiet woman in civilian clothes had transformed into their guardian angel. For Sarah Mitchell, it was just another day at the office protecting those who could not protect themselves. As the aircraft descended toward the emergency landing at Halifax Stanfield International Airport, Sarah found herself surrounded by passengers who wanted to thank her, touch her, understand what they had just witnessed. The young mother with the baby pressed a handwritten note into her hand with tears streaming down her face. An elderly veteran recognized something familiar in Sarah's movements and gave her a knowing salute that spoke volumes about shared understanding of duty and sacrifice. But Sarah's attention was focused on the three unconscious attackers and the disturbing implications of what the youngest one had said before she rendered him unconscious. There are others, many others. This is just the beginning. The words echoed in her mind as she tried to understand what kind of coordinated operation they might have interrupted. Captain Rodriguez appeared from the cockpit, having handed control to his co-pilot for the landing procedures. He was a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who had spent decades handling aviation emergencies. His eyes held the respect of one professional warrior recognizing another. "Commander Mitchell," he asked quietly, having somehow learned her rank and name during the crisis. Sarah nodded, unsurprised that he had identified her. Military pilots often knew each other by reputation, and her actions during the hijacking would have confirmed his suspicions about her background. "Captain Rodriguez, I presume. Nice flying under pressure." "Thank you, but I think we both know who really saved this aircraft today." He glanced at the restrained attackers. "I've been in contact with air traffic control and Homeland Security. They want to debrief you immediately after we land." "I expected as much. What's the status of other aircraft? Has anyone reported similar incidents?" Rodriguez's expression darkened. "That's what has everyone concerned. 2 other flights from European airports have gone radio silent in the past hour. Air traffic control lost contact with them at approximately the same time our situation began. It could be coincidence, but you don't believe in coincidences any more than I do," Sarah finished. Her worst fears were being confirmed. This had not been an isolated incident, but part of a larger coordinated attack on commercial aviation. The implications were staggering and required immediate action from counterterrorism experts. Patricia appeared beside them with a first aid kit, checking Sarah for injuries despite the protest that she was fine. The flight attendant's hands had stopped shaking, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who had found purpose in helping others. "The passengers are asking questions about what happens next. Should I make an announcement?" "Tell them the truth," Sarah replied. "We're making an emergency landing for their safety, and law enforcement will handle everything from there. They've been through enough uncertainty for one day." As Patricia moved away to address passenger concerns, Sarah turned her attention back to Captain Rodriguez. "Have you been able to determine how they got weapons through security? Those ceramic knives should have been detected by screening equipment. That's another troubling element. Initial reports suggest they may have had inside assistance at Heathrow Airport, someone with access to security protocols who could help them bypass detection systems." Rodriguez kept his voice low to avoid alarming nearby passengers. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the aircraft's air conditioning. Inside assistance meant this attack had been planned for months, possibly years. The level of coordination required suggested involvement by professional terrorist organizations with extensive resources and intelligence capabilities. This was not the work of amateur extremists, but sophisticated operators with serious backing. The youngest attacker began showing signs of consciousness, his eyelids fluttering as he slowly emerged from the chokehold-induced unconsciousness. Sarah moved to his position and knelt beside him, her presence both protective and threatening as he tried to orient himself to his changed circumstances. "Good morning, sunshine," she said conversationally. "Ready to answer some questions?" His eyes focused on her with recognition and hatred, but also with a grudging respect that suggested professional acknowledgement of her skills. "You fight well for a woman. My instructors would be impressed." "Your instructors? Tell me about them." What did you train? He smiled with the confidence of someone who believed his cause was righteous and his sacrifice meaningful. You think I will betray my brothers because you defeated me? You understand nothing about our commitment or our mission. Sarah studied his face carefully, noting the fanatic's gleam in his eyes that suggested ideological rather than mercenary motivation. Religious or political extremists were often more difficult to break than criminals motivated by personal gain. They saw themselves as martyrs rather than terrorists, making them resistant to normal interrogation techniques. I understand that you're young and foolish enough to throw your life away for someone else's twisted agenda, she replied calmly. But I also understand that you care about your teammates. The other aircraft your people targeted, are they already dead? For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across his features before he regained his composure. You will learn the truth soon enough. Today is only the first chapter in a story that will change everything. The aircraft's descent steepened as they approached Halifax Airport, and Sarah could see emergency vehicles already positioned on the runway below. Fire trucks, ambulances, and what appear to be federal law enforcement vehicles were prepared to respond to whatever condition the aircraft might be in upon landing. The Canadian authorities were taking no chances with a confirmed terrorist incident. An elderly passenger approached Sarah hesitantly, his hands shaking with emotion and gratitude. "Excuse me, miss. I just wanted to thank you for saving our lives. I'm a retired teacher, and I've never seen anything like what you did today. You're a hero." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the praise, as she always did when people called her a hero for simply doing what her training and conscience demanded. "I just did what needed to be done. Anyone in my position would have acted the same way." "No," the man replied firmly. "Most people would have been too frightened to move. You chose to risk your life for strangers. That's the definition of heroism." Captain Rodriguez received an update through his headset and turned to Sarah with grave concern. "The news isn't good. One of the missing aircraft has been located. Flight 847 from Frankfurt crashed into the North Sea approximately 30 minutes ago. No survivors." Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with partial failure. She had saved this aircraft and its passengers, but somewhere over the cold waters of the North Sea, another plane full of innocent people had died because the terrorists had succeeded in their mission. The knowledge that she could not save everyone did not diminish the pain of knowing they had died. "What about the third aircraft?" she asked. "Still missing. Last contact was over the Atlantic, approximately 2 hours behind our position. Search and rescue operations are being coordinated by multiple governments." The youngest attacker had been listening to their conversation, and Sarah saw satisfaction creep into his expression at the news of the crashed aircraft. His pleasure at the deaths of innocent people confirmed her assessment of him as a true believer rather than someone who might be reasoned with or turned against his handlers. Patricia returned with updates from the cabin. "The passengers are holding up well, considering what they've been through. Several people have asked if they can write letters of commendation for you. They want to make sure your actions are properly recognized by your military superiors." "I'm not active duty anymore," Sarah explained, "but I appreciate their thoughtfulness. These people showed remarkable courage under impossible circumstances." The aircraft touched down at Halifax with the gentle precision of an expert pilot managing an emergency landing. Captain Rodriguez had brought them home safely despite the chaos and violence that had erupted in his cabin. As they taxied toward the waiting emergency vehicles, Sarah could see armed security personnel taking positions around the aircraft. "Commander Mitchell," Captain Rodriguez said formally, "it has been an honor serving with you today. I hope our paths cross again under better circumstances." Sarah shook his hand with genuine respect. "The honor was mine, Captain. Thank you for getting us down safely. As the aircraft came to a stop, Sarah prepared herself for the next phase of what would undoubtedly be a long and complicated investigation. Federal agents would want detailed debriefs about the attack, the attacker's statements, and any intelligence she might have gathered during the engagement. The young terrorist's words about this being only the first chapter suggested that other attacks might be planned or already in progress. The main cabin door opened, and armed federal agents boarded the aircraft with the smooth efficiency of professionals responding to a terrorist incident. Sarah stood calmly with her hands visible as they approached, knowing that she would initially be treated as a potential threat until her identity and actions could be verified through proper channels. Commander Sarah Mitchell, the lead agent, asked, consulting a tablet that presumably contained her military records and security clearances. That's correct. Agent Thompson, Royal Canadian Mounted Police Counterterrorism Unit. I need to ask you to come with us for immediate debriefing. We have a lot of questions about what happened here today. Sarah looked back at the passengers who were beginning to disembark under careful security supervision. The elderly teacher who had thanked her gave her an encouraging wave, while the young mother with the baby mouthed, "Thank you," one more time. These people would go home to their families because she had been on this flight, and that knowledge made everything else worthwhile. As federal agents escorted the 3 terrorists from the aircraft in handcuffs and leg shackles, Sarah caught the youngest one looking at her with something that might have been respect mixed with his obvious hatred. Whatever organization had trained these men, they would now know that their carefully planned operation had been disrupted by a single American woman with the skills and courage to fight back. The investigation was just beginning, but Sarah already knew that this would not be the end of her involvement in stopping whatever larger plot these terrorists represented. Her quiet retirement had lasted exactly 3 weeks, and now she was back in the fight whether she wanted to be or not. The war against terror had found her again, and this time the battlefield was anywhere innocent people might be threatened by those who chose violence over peace. 6 hours after the emergency landing in Halifax, Sarah sat in a sterile interrogation room across from a team of international intelligence officers representing the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. The walls were painted institutional green, and the fluorescent lighting cast everything in harsh shadows that made the already serious atmosphere even more intense. Coffee cups and legal pads covered the metal table between them, evidence of the marathon debriefing session that had been underway since shortly after the aircraft touched down. Agent Thompson of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police led the questioning, while FBI agent Maria Santos took detailed notes and MI6 Representative James Crawford provided insights into European terrorist networks. All 3 were seasoned professionals who had spent their careers tracking international threats, but even they seemed impressed by the thoroughness of Sarah's tactical analysis and the precision of her recall regarding every detail of the hijacking. Let's go through the conversation with the youngest attacker one more time, Agent Thompson requested, leaning forward with obvious concentration. His exact words could be crucial to identifying the organization behind this coordinated attack. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, accessing the perfect recall that years of military intelligence training had developed. He said, "You think I will betray my brothers because you defeated me? You understand nothing about our commitment or our mission." When I asked about the other aircraft, he replied, "You will learn the truth soon enough. Today is only the first chapter in a story that will change everything." Agent Santos looked up from her notes. The phrase "change everything" suggests they believe this attack will trigger some kind of broader response or retaliation. We're analyzing similar language patterns from other known terrorist communications to identify potential organizational connections. What's the current status of the missing aircraft? Sarah asked, though she suspected the news would not be good based on the grim expressions around the table. Agent Crawford answered with the precise British accent of career intelligence work. Flight 492 from Amsterdam was found approximately 2 hours ago. Like the Frankfurt flight, it crashed into the ocean with no survivors. Preliminary analysis suggests both aircraft were deliberately crashed by hijackers who gained control of the cockpits. The weight of those words settled over the room like a burial shroud. While Sarah had managed to save her aircraft and its 312 passengers, 2 other planes carrying nearly 400 innocent people had been destroyed by the same coordinated attack. The knowledge that she could not have been on all 3 flights did nothing to diminish the sense of loss and responsibility she felt for those victims. Agent Thompson studied a file containing preliminary analysis of the 3 captured terrorists. What we're learning about your attackers is deeply troubling. All 3 entered the UK using perfectly crafted false identities that passed every security screening. Their fingerprints and facial recognition data don't match anything in international databases, suggesting they were specifically created for this mission. Ghost identities, Sarah observed. That level of sophistication requires state-level resources or connections to organizations with serious intelligence capabilities. These weren't amateur extremists working out of someone's basement. Agent Santos nodded grimly. The ceramic weapons they carried were manufactured using techniques that suggest access to advanced materials science and precision fabrication equipment. Someone invested significant time and money in making sure they could get those weapons past airport security. Sarah thought about the youngest attacker's training and skill level during their fight. The young one moved like he had formal military combat training. His knife work and hand-to-hand combat techniques were too polished for anything you could learn in a terrorist training camp. Someone with serious credentials taught him how to fight. That matches our preliminary assessment, Agent Crawford confirmed. We believe at least 2 of them served in Balkan conflicts during the 1990s before being recruited by whatever organization planned this attack. Their fighting skills were honed in actual combat against NATO forces. The interrogation room door opened, and a senior official Sarah didn't recognize entered with an urgent expression and a classified folder under his arm. His presence immediately elevated the tension in the room, suggesting he brought information that would significantly change their understanding of the situation. "Commander Mitchell," he said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "I'm Deputy Director Williams from the National Security Agency. I need to brief you on some classified intelligence that directly relates to your actions today." Sarah straightened in her chair, recognizing the weight of authority in his voice and manner. "I'm listening, sir. 3 months ago, we intercepted communications suggesting a major attack on commercial aviation was being planned by a previously unknown terrorist network. The intelligence was fragmentary, and we couldn't determine specific targets or timing, but the scale of the planned operation was unprecedented." Agent Thompson leaned forward with interest. Why wasn't this intelligence shared with aviation security agencies? It was shared, but the lack of specifics made it difficult to implement effective countermeasures beyond general alertness protocols. We had no way of knowing which flights would be targeted or what methods the attackers would use. Deputy Director Williams opened his folder and removed several photographs. However, we did manage to identify one of the key planners. He placed a surveillance photo on the table that showed a middle-aged man with distinctive facial scars and cold, calculating eyes. Sarah studied the image carefully, noting the military bearing and confident posture that suggested leadership experience and combat training. "This is Viktor Kozlov, former Spetsnaz colonel who disappeared from Russian military records," in 2001. Intelligence sources indicate he's been training terrorist operatives for various organizations throughout Europe and the Middle East. We believe he was the tactical planner for today's coordinated attacks. Sarah felt a chill of recognition as she studied the photograph more closely. I've seen this face before, not in person, but in intelligence briefings during my tours in Afghanistan. He was suspected of training Taliban fighters in advanced combat techniques and explosives handling. That's correct. Kozlov has been a ghost for over 20 years, surfacing occasionally when major terrorist attacks demonstrate his signature training methods and tactical planning. Today's operation bears all the hallmarks of his work. Agent Santos looked up from her notes with obvious concern. If Kozlov planned this attack, then we have to assume it's part of a much larger operation. He doesn't think small, and he never stops with a single strike. Deputy Director Williams nodded gravely. Our analysis suggests today's attacks were designed to test aviation security responses and gather intelligence about counterterrorism capabilities. The fact that your aircraft was successfully defended while the others were not will provide valuable data for planning future operations. Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again. By successfully defending her flight, she had inadvertently provided Kozlov and his organization with tactical intelligence about what worked and what didn't in their attack methodology. They would learn from today's mixed results and adjust their planning accordingly. What's being done to track down Kozlov and prevent future attacks? She asked. Agent Crawford answered with the careful precision of someone delivering classified information. Multiple intelligence agencies are coordinating the largest counterterrorism operation since September 11th. We're following every lead from today's attacks while simultaneously working to identify potential future targets. The problem, Agent Thompson added, is that Kozlov has had months or possibly years to prepare multiple contingency plans. Today's attacks may have been just the opening move in a much more complex operation. Sarah stood and walked to the small window overlooking the airport tarmac, where she could see the aircraft that had carried them safely through their ordeal. Emergency vehicles still surrounded it while forensic teams processed evidence, and she could see federal agents interviewing passengers who were finally being allowed to continue their interrupted journeys. Deputy Director Williams, she said without turning around, "What do you need from me? We need you to stay available for consultation as this investigation develops. Your military experience and first-hand knowledge of the attacker's capabilities make you invaluable to our analysis efforts." Sarah turned back to face the assembled intelligence officers. My retirement officially ended the moment those terrorists made their move. If Viktor Kozlov wants to target innocent civilians, then he's going to have to go through people like me to do it. Agent Santos smiled for the first time since the debriefing began. We were hoping you'd say that. There's a joint task force being formed to coordinate the hunt for Kozlov and his network. We'd like you to consider joining it in an operational capacity. Consider it done, Sarah replied without hesitation. These people killed 400 innocent passengers today, and they're planning to kill more. That makes this personal. As the debriefing concluded and the intelligence officers began making arrangements for her continued involvement in the investigation, Sarah reflected on how quickly her quiet retirement had transformed into a new mission. She had hoped to leave the war behind when she resigned her commission, but today had proven that evil would always find new ways to threaten innocent people. 3 hours later, as Sarah finally boarded a new flight to continue her journey to New York, she carried with her the gratitude of 312 passengers who owed their lives to her training and courage. But She also carried the weight of knowing that 400 other innocent people had died because she couldn't be everywhere at once. The elderly teacher who had thanked her approached one final time as passengers settled into their seats for the rescheduled flight. I've been thinking about what you said earlier about anyone in your position doing the same thing. I don't think that's true. You chose to be someone who could make a difference when it mattered most. That choice made you a hero long before today. As the aircraft lifted off from Halifax toward New York, Sarah looked down at the airport where her new mission had begun. Somewhere in the world, Viktor Kozlov was planning his next attack on innocent people. But now he would face opposition from someone who understood his methods and possessed the skills to stop him. The war was far from over, but today had proven that ordinary people could become extraordinary when they refused to let evil triumph over good. Sarah Mitchell was no longer a retired Navy SEAL pilot seeking a peaceful vacation. She was a warrior returning to battle, armed with the knowledge that some fights were too important to leave to someone else. The hunt for Viktor Kozlov was about to begin, and this time he would discover that his carefully planned operations could be disrupted by people willing to stand between terrorists and their intended victims. Today's attack had been his first move in a larger game, but it would not be his last. The difference was that now Sarah Mitchell was playing too, and she had never lost a fight that truly mattered.